We're very happy to see all you here with us today and very happy to see the sunshine. It's a little bit warm in here. We've opened the sides. Hopefully we won't blow away while we listen here today. But thanks for joining us for Growing Figs in Cold Climates. We are trying to schedule at least a once-a-month class, so you guys stay tuned. We've got our April class coming on herbs, April 14th, so that'll be coming up. And if you're into pollinators, we're planning a whole week for Pollinators Week in June, so that'll be coming up. I'll be getting that up, our activities and speakers for that. But today we're here to learn about figs. And we have the American Fig Company from Farmington, Arkansas here with us. They were here for a few presentations last year, so some of y'all might be familiar with them. If not, we do have their plants with us, and they also sell their plants directly. So Chad and Valerie have been doing this for, I don't know how many years. But
it's been a long time, but business-wise, like probably 3 years.
3 years officially, we'll just say it that way. They have a beautiful yard in Farmington full of edible landscaping with lots of figs. So they know how to do it, and we're excited to have them share with us. And I'm going to let you go, Chad.
All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
So I'm interested to know, this is a really good turnout for figs. That's awesome. How many of you guys are currently growing figs? And how many of you guys are getting fruit every year from your figs? Yeah, there's quite a few hands. Well, hopefully we're going to solve that problem today. But growing figs in a cold climate, and you know, there's some people that live in like zone 2 or 3, and I say growing in cold climates, and they're like, well, you know, zone 6 and zone 7, that's not cold. But when we're talking about fruiting plants, that is pretty cold. I mean, as you keep going down in growing zones, your options really start dwindling down. So usually zone 5 is considered a cold planting zone when it comes to fruiting plants. But with figs, especially, zone 5 is really that cutoff point. Like you're not growing figs any lower than that, and if you are, it's going to be in a container, which, by the way, they do really good in a container. But for growing them in ground, it's really going to come down to varieties, as we'll talk about in just a second. So yeah, we're going to talk about the different types of figs, how to plant and care for your fig trees, and then specific varieties for our planting zone if you're wanting to do the in-ground growing. And a cold hardy fig is one that can be planted in the ground. It has complete winter dieback. It can grow back from the roots and still give a large crop of fruit by the end of a short growing season. So just kind of giving a definition to what exactly we're talking about here. We can grow any type of fig in the ground, and they'll die back to the ground. They'll come back from the roots, but that doesn't mean you're going to get fruit. And on our social media, we get a lot of people asking questions. I've been growing figs for 5-10 years, and I've still never gotten fruit from my fig tree. And the answer is probably you're not growing the right varieties. So a lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to end up with little tiny fruit, and then the end of the season comes, and they're never ripening. And you see them year after year, they're taunting you, but you never get them. So when we're talking about fig types, we have common figs, just Ficus corica. They're self-fertile, they don't need a pollinator. A lot of people, they ask about the fig wasp. We don't have a fig wasp here. They can only be in Mediterranean-like climates. There's a few places in the United States that has the fig wasp. Outside of that, there is no fig wasp. But thankfully with the common fig, we don't need that pollination. So when we are talking about growing figs in the ground, we are only talking about a main crop. There's a breva crop and there's a main crop. A breva crop grows on the previous year's wood. So those would be the figs that you're getting early in the spring if you live in a warmer planting zone, or if you grow them in a container, you'll get 2 crops a year from your figs. But in a colder planting zone, we're really looking for that main crop. We kind of have to forget about the breva crop because it's just not going to happen. We might have a freakishly warm winter where those figs will overwinter successfully, the top growth. But outside of that, we're not going to be getting brevet crops, and we tend to have a lot of late frosts, which are probably going to end up taking care of those anyway. So like I said, in a container, 2 crops a year in the ground. We're looking for that very early main crop. We don't really have that long of a growing season, so we need them to ripen up quickly. And for anybody that's growing them in the ground and you're not getting those fruit, it's because you have a late season variety of fig, and it's just never going to happen. Not to crush anybody's spirits who does have a fig in the ground that doesn't give them fruit, but you know, maybe keep it in the garden for its beauty, but it's probably never going to give you fruit. So as far as fig care is concerned, they do well in a wide variety of soils. If you're not getting fruit and you're wondering why you're not getting fruit, it's usually not going to be the soil, because they can almost grow in anything. The only type of soil they're not going to like is something that is just retaining tons of moisture. They're a Mediterranean plant. They like a well-draining soil. But outside of that, they can really do well in a lot of different soils, including rocky soils. They'll be perfectly fine with that. Obviously, we want to have the full sun. That pretty much goes for almost all types of fruiting plants. There's very few fruiting plants that do well in a shady location, and figs is not one of those. So if you have a fig tree, don't plant it under a big oak tree or a maple tree. That dappled light is not going to suit it well. And figs actually need heat in order to get sweet and ripe. So figs actually ripen in succession. You're not going to get one large crop of figs, you know, at one time. It's not going to be like apples, you know, where you're going out and harvesting all your fruit. They're really just going to ripen over the last little bit of the season for many weeks. So it might be one of those things, you go out, you get a bucket of figs, and then you're going to come back as the days go on and keep getting buckets of figs. But you're not getting all your fruit at one time. And another really important aspect of growing figs is choosing a proper microclimate. A microclimate would be something like a brick southern exposure. If you have a fence, we always want to plant it on a southern exposure. The more sunlight you can give it, the better. And that little extra warmth through the winter is really going to help protect those roots. Like I said, typically they're going to die back to the ground. There's probably going to be a few seasons where they won't, but if you're going to plant a fig, just expect you're going to get that winter dieback. But by putting it in a microclimate, we're giving it a little bit of extra warmth, which when the end of the season comes, we're going to allow a little bit more sweetness into those figs with that extra warmth. They'll do okay, you know, if you plant them like in the middle of a field or something, but you might not get that last little bit of fruit. So the microclimate is kind of a big deal. If you have the southern exposure, you definitely want to plant it there. And in tropical climates, fig trees do become really huge. I don't know if anybody's from a warmer. Yeah, they get really big. They turn into huge trees, and it's not recommended that you would plant that next to a house. On our social media, you know, we have all these figs planted next to our house and next to fences, and people are, you know, start commenting that are like from California, and they're like, oh my gosh, your house is going to fall down. That's not going to happen in a colder climate. Those roots are really kept in check by the colder temperatures. The top growth is kept in check by the colder temperatures. So we don't need to worry about it ruining our houses. You can plant it pretty close to a wall and still be okay. Pruning the winter dieback, it really doesn't matter too much when you prune your fig trees. When that top growth dies, you can prune it, you know, right before spring when the new growth starts emerging from the roots. You know, because maybe you might have a couple of buds that survived a little bit higher up on the tree. But besides that, I mean, as soon as those leaves fall off in the winter, you can cut them back and, you know, get to mulching, which is also on here. It's one of the most important things, hands down, that you can know about growing figs in our climate. You want to mulch them. You want to mulch in the summer. It's going to help hold the moisture in the soil if we go through any droughts. But also, it's going to keep the roots warm during the winter time. And for anybody that's having figs die in the winter, you're not successfully overwintering them, If we get a freakishly cold winter, you know, I think it was just a couple of years ago that we had -15, -20 degrees. I mean, that's fig killing weather. That's almost kill almost anything we grow here weather. But if you have a nice, you know, 6-inch layer of mulch, even on top of the base of the fig tree, it's going to keep them nice and toasty, and they will come back. As soon as the warmer weather starts coming back in, you can move that mulch back, and you'll start seeing the buds start to burst, and all that new growth starts coming. Figs can grow up to 12 feet in a single season, so when you see plants that are any of these sizes right here, I mean, they're one of the fastest growing fruit trees that you could possibly plant. So if you want fruit very quickly, figs are definitely something you're going to want to have in your garden. 12 feet in a single season is really unheard of. So we're literally talking about something like this being put in the ground. We cut it all the way back to 1 or 2 nodes. These little spots here are what the nodes are. I know it's kind of probably hard to see from there, but so we're talking about cutting it all the way back to here, and it'll be 12 feet by the end of the season. So it's very insane. If you haven't grown them before, you'll be surprised. This is another really good thing about figs in our climate. They really don't have that many pests. Usually the deer are going to stay away from them. They tend not to like them. If other food sources are short, they might come in and start taking a few. So it's not unheard of for them to come after them, but they prefer other things. So they'll probably go after everything else in your garden first. And then when it runs out, they'll move to the figs. Ants can be kind of a big deal. So there's such a thing as an open eye fig and a closed eye fig, and it's just the little hole at the bottom of the fig. If it's an open eye fig, those ants can crawl in there, and it's not the end of the world. They're not ruining your figs. You could cut them open, wash them out, which might sound kind of nasty, but it's just the reality of gardening. There's always going to be pests that we're dealing with, but thankfully the ants don't actually destroy them, and they kind of have like a sacrificial fruit. Usually I've noticed like all the ants will go to like 1 or 2 of the fruit that are maybe like perfectly ripe at the time, and they'll just be working on that for days and days. So that leaves all the other figs, you know, for you to pick them. But don't let the ants deter you. They're probably the biggest thing, in my opinion, when you're growing figs to watch out for. So, but yeah, they're resistant to most pests. Like I said, the birds really don't know what a fig is. They might eventually figure it out, but we've not had any problems with the birds. We don't have problems with deer, and you know, they're not very common. Figs aren't very common here. They're kind of just coming into popularity, and so the birds, they just leave them alone. They don't really know, and they kind of, especially the green figs, the green variety of figs. So we have white Marseille right here. That's actually going to be a green fig. It kind of tricks the birds because they're like, oh, that's not ripe yet, and it really is. It's just a green fruit. So that kind of helps out. Almost every fig on the entire planet it's called fig mosaic virus or a rust. Very common. If you get a fig without it, you're one of the lucky ones, but it doesn't actually harm the tree in any way, and most of the figs actually outgrow it in time. So if you see any of the rust, just like you would see on apples or pears, it's really not a concern. It doesn't harm the fruit, doesn't harm the plant. And like I said, over time it'll go away.
Is it on the leaves or the fruit?
It's on the leaves, specifically on the leaves. I've never seen it on the fruit. But it can make the leaves kind of look a little bit wonky and maybe, you know, just look a little bit diseased. But it's more of a cosmetic issue than anything. So harvesting figs, like I said, they ripen in succession, which is a really nice thing. It gives you a food source for an extended period of time. You know, sometimes when we're growing things like peaches or apples, it can kind of, well, apples have a pretty good shelf life, but peaches not so much. And it's like that with a lot of fruits. They ripen at the same time, and then you don't know what to do with everything, and you're trying to pump out the pies and give them to neighbors and friends and everything. It's not like that with figs. You know, it gives you kind of just the right amount on a daily basis to either eat them fresh, or if you wanted to store them, you know, just get a freezer safe Ziploc bag, throw them in there and stick them in the freezer and just keep adding. and by the end of a season, you can make as much jam as you want. And fig jam, in my opinion, is one of the best things on the planet. So I don't share my figs very often, sorry. When they're ripe, they kind of start to hook down. So for the most part, when they're first emerging, all the way up to ripeness, they're very stiff and sticking straight out. They're just horizontal. And as they're ripening up, they start getting some weight to them, and they start pulling down. So that's one sign that they're ripe. But then for the finishing touch, when you touch the fig, it should be pretty soft to the touch. It's going to have quite a bit of give. If it doesn't have a lot of give, it's not perfectly ripe. And if you pick it a little bit too early, you know, I've heard some people say they don't like figs, and I would have to assume they either bought them at the store, so you're just getting that one type of fig, you know, that they grow in California and ship, or Mexico and ship. Or they're not picking them when they're ripe enough. If you don't, whenever you think they're ripe, give them like another day or two. I'll just put it that way, because the longer you can wait, the sweeter it's going to be. Some figs do spoil if they're left on too long, but there are specific varieties that they can actually dry out on the tree. So you can just leave them there. They'll dry out like the ones you would, you know, buy at the store in a package, and they taste amazing, just like jam, a jammy texture. And that's hands down one of my favorite ways to enjoy a fig. So a really good one for that is called Unknown Ashbury Black. If anybody's been into figs for any amount of time, you know that they start, you know, it's just unknown this, unknown that, wherever they happen to find the fig. So there's a lot of unknown varieties of figs, and some of them are the best tasting figs, in my opinion. And there's a variety called Unknown Ashbury Black. It can dry on the tree. And that extends, you know, you can just put them in a bag and they'll last a really long time that way, and they taste great. And storing the fig, like I said, you're definitely, if you're going to keep it for any amount of time, you want to put it in the freezer. Just in the freezer safe bags, perfect way to do it. And if you're going to make jam with the figs, the longer that they're in the freezer, the better. When they get kind of that mush to them, they're actually better, if that sounds weird, but they're better for jams that way. So, recommended varieties for growing in a cold climate. There's different flavors of figs. Most people don't know that. If people tell me they don't like figs, it's because they think there's one type of fig, the kind they bought at the store. But there's many different flavor profiles of figs. Some of them can get very complex. But when we're talking about sugar figs, you know, Texas Everbearing, Brown Turkey, LSU Purple, they're all sugar figs. And there's honey and melon profiles. White Marseille, which we actually have here at White River right now. Really good variety. Now, something important when it comes to White Marseille, if you buy a White Marseille like at a supermarket, you know, they tend to get these things in large quantities. They are notorious for not having the right label on these figs. So you think you're buying something and you're getting something else, and that's how most people get a fig that is not actually cold hardy like they thought. You know, some people might even get a Chicago Hardy at the supermarket, and they're so excited they're gonna get fruit. Years goes by, they never get fruit. And it's just because these nurseries, they're so big, they're mislabeling things, they're going to the store, and unfortunately, you know, some of us end up with that. So that's why it's important to buy from quality locations such as White River. You know, they're doing a great job of really bringing in a lot of variety and making sure that people are getting the right type of plant. And it's not that difficult to do, you know, if you put a little effort into things. But these big box stores, you know, they really don't care. A lot of times they just get stuff in and they don't really know anything about the plant. So it's important to buy from people who understand the plants, know about them, and really put effort into it. Long to Out is a really great one. Cadota, Sweet Diana, all of these varieties that you see up here, great for cold climates. There are some varieties. Black Mission is a very popular one. It's a great fig, but not good for in-ground growing. That's something that you might see at the store. Celeste is another one. It's sometimes you're going to get fruit off of it, sometimes you're not. That's one of those iffy ones. It's kind of right on the line. If we have a little bit of an extended season, we can get fruit, but if not, it's just kind of an iffy one. But it's a beautiful fig. It has a really different type of leaf to it. Violet de Bordeaux, we have Violet de Bordeaux here right now. That's hands down easily one of the best figs that you could grow in a cold climate. It's going to push out so many figs very early on. It's a berry fig, which personally is like my favorite. Like when we start getting into the berry figs, I go crazy. I love berry figs. And Hardy Chicago falls into that berry fig profile, and it is a good fig. One of my main missions is to really push out that there are more varieties than what people typically see at the store. I kind of go on about, you know, buying things from the big box stores, but it's just because you're just going to see the same thing all the time. You know, if you're really into fruit for a while, eventually you just kind of, it was exciting at first, and then eventually you're just like, oh, I saw that, you know, 10 years ago too. It just never ends, and it gets boring. Right now at our farm, we're growing 165 different varieties of figs. That's how many different varieties of figs there are. Not all of them are cold hardy, but quite a few of them are cold hardy. So part of our mission is to really show people there's more to figs than meets the eye. If you think you don't like them, you just got to try some different varieties. And that's not to knock some of the varieties. I understand, you know, when something is super widely available, it's a good segue for people. It just gets people started. They plant that first, you know, fig tree, and it kind of gives them the bug, and then they start doing more research, and they find these other varieties. So, Tacoma Violet, another good one. Dalmati, really good one. Now, Dalmati is kind of strange because usually the berry figs, they're going to have a purple outside color to them. So it's a very, you know, it's kind of a dead giveaway. That's going to be a berry fig. It's probably going to have a red interior. But Dalmati is cool because the outside of the fig is green, but when you cut it open, it's just a deep, deep red. Very beautiful fig. So, like I said, 165 varieties at the farm. I'm listing some of the best ones that you can plant. I'm sure most people have probably heard of the brown turkey and the Hardy Chicago. Good segues into figs if you're not growing one. I mean, I do recommend growing them because they're just proven winners. You're going to get fruit. They're great for making jam. Maybe not like the best tasting figs, but a lot of uses, and you know you're going to get fruit, so kind of hard to beat that. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I wanted to leave room because for anybody that is growing figs, you probably have questions. So if anybody has questions, I want to leave room for kind of answering that.
Well, here again, that one you said that it's early and it's berry type. What was that?
The Dalmati, is that the one that you were thinking of?
I don't remember.
That I said was a green exterior?
No, I don't remember that.
No, it's the violet.
Oh, Violet de Bordeaux?
Yeah.
Yeah, Violet de Bordeaux, that's a very good one. I really highly recommend growing that one. Not to push anything on you guys, but it's a good fig. Yes, ma'am.
I have a fig, and I have no idea what it is. It came from Central Arkansas. Somebody gave me a cutting, or gave me a pot. I've had it in a container, large container, about 5 years, and I do get fruit. But I've never repotted it. Do I need to repot it, or do I prune the roots with a sharp knife, you know, going around like that, or anything like that?
Yeah, so usually for a fig, a 10-gallon to 15-gallon container could be a great permanent home. Root pruning is a great option, and it can be more. You can be more aggressive than just simply cutting the outer edges. I would take probably half of the root mass off of there. You know, just go around. I'll actually take like a saw and literally just hack off, you know,
Do you
edges
leave that
of it.
in there and just let it decompose?
No,
Or
I
you
get
take it out?
Yes, yeah. You take it out of the pot, cut the edges of those roots off,
Okay.
and then put some nice fresh soil in there, and you should be able to keep it in there for another 2-3 years before
I
having
always
to do
move
that
it in the
again.
garage in the winter.
Yeah, I would say most important thing for anything grown in a container would just be to have a fertilization schedule. You know, they don't have access to nutrients outside of the container. So yeah, very important to fertilize, and just an all-purpose fertilizer. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just nice, even numbers across the board is good.
Could you recommend a very best variety for cold weather, for for sure and all that?
Yes. So, brown turkey, Chicago Hardy, those are great. But yeah, Violet de Bordeaux, White Marseille is another really good one. The reason I say that about White Marseille specifically, I was talking about the stores, I kind of got sidetracked. I have, ADHD. But so White Marseille is notorious for being at the big box stores, and it is not White Marseille. It's a variety called Tina. Tina is never going to give you fruit. It's a great variety for container growing, but it's not a good variety for in the ground. So it's very important when you're getting White Marseille. It's actually more difficult to get a good White Marseille than you would think. All of the White Marseille that are here are true, real, cold hardy White Marseille, and I highly recommend it. There's Unknown Ashbury Black. I could list so many, and I can. But
I was gonna buy a fig that I wanted success with, brown turkey or Chicago Hardy.
Yes, yeah, that would be a good segue if you're not growing any figs to get into
Violet.
it. Violet de Bordeaux and White Marseille, those are great starters. And if you get a White Marseille, Violet de Bordeaux, you're getting kind of two different worlds of flavor profiles, so you can kind of see what kind of fruit you enjoy more. Because like me personally, I'm not a big melon fig type of person. I enjoy the berry figs. The honey figs are really good, but berry is my favorite, and everybody's palates are different, so there's definitely a fig for everybody. And it's just, so if you wanted to test flavor profiles, because obviously you're not going to the store and finding some of these different varieties. If you go to the store, you're going to find one type of fig, maybe. So if you want to test flavor profiles, get a fig, grow it in a container for a year or two, and that'll allow you to get some good size to the plant. Maybe prune it in a way that you would want it. Try the fruit, and if you don't like it, gift it to somebody and move on to the next variety. But that's a good way to kind of test the waters with it. And then if you find one you really like, plant a bunch of it. Yes, ma'am.
If you do use a container, does it need to be brought in the winter?
Yes, to an unheated garage, a shed. They don't need a lot of protection here. But in a container, I typically recommend growing them more as kind of an in-between of a tree and a shrub. You want to keep it shorter, easier to move. A 10-gallon container can be a great forever home for a fig, and that can be pretty easy, just to kind of bring back and forth. Growing in a container also gives you the ability to get that breva crop, so you're going to get 2 crops a year. You're not going to get as many fruit as an in-ground fig, but for some people don't have the space for it. Some people live in apartments, and growing figs in a container is a great option. Yes, ma'am.
So when do you plant?
In the ground. In the ground, you want to wait till after the last frost date, 100%. Maybe even wait a week or two past that, just to be sure. And the reason that I say that is not that it's not going to survive, but it just really gives it the ability. You would like to get one full growing season of root growth in the ground before it goes through a winter. And if we kind of plant it like we plant other trees in the wintertime, there's a chance that it might not come back. You really want to get those roots established. So after the last frost date, 100%.
And when is the last frost date, Chad?
I want to say is it April 18th?
Yes,
This year?
mid-April, and that actually translates to the 1st of May for us.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you ever try to insulate the branches over winter?
That's a great question. I know a lot of people in the fig community that do that, and they do it successfully. If you're going to have 1 or 2 fig trees, it's not a problem. You can totally do that. Wrap it in burlap, shove some straw in there, and make sure to keep it dry, because you're going to end up getting mold, and that's going to be the killer.
Okay.
So there are people that have tried to overwinter figs like that and have failed miserably, because it's easy for little droplets of water to get in there, for mold to set in. But if you can keep them dry, it's totally possible. With how many figs we grow, I don't deter people from that, but if you're going to have a substantial number of trees, it takes up a lot of time. And so in my personal opinion, it's better to plant thinking I probably won't get to it, and I want to make sure I still get fruit. But yeah, if you have 1 or 2 figs, you can do that for sure. Yes, sir.
I've tried the overwintering, and this is a pruning question. Am I better off? I've got a couple of Chicago Hardies. Am I better off just pruning it to the ground each year, or wait to see if any growth comes on the old branches and then prune back the stuff that didn't?
That's a personal preference, but for me personally, I prune them back to the ground no matter what, because I want it to grow more like a bush, and the more years that we get of that cutback, the thicker of a bush we're going to get. And figs are really great because there's no thinning of the fruit necessary. They're going to pretty much ripen up everything that's there, no problem. So it's personal preference. You know, if you can get by with that extra year of growth, why not? You know.
And when do you do that?
Typically before, if you're going to prune it back, I would do it before it hits 15 degrees, because below 15 degrees is where it starts getting iffy for that upper growth. Especially, I mean, if we're talking like kind of that intermittent growth, semi-hardwood, that stuff's going to definitely die at about 15 degrees. So just before that really first hard frost would be a good time to do that. Yes, ma'am.
So we have neighbors that have a big tree that's really old, and it's probably 8 or 10 feet wide at the base. And it used to produce a lot of figs. I don't know what variety it is, but now it's not producing at all.
Is it pruned back?
No.
Well, I'd prune it back. So that main crop of figs is only going to come on new growth. So if you know the old growth is there, it's just a good idea to cut it back. You're going to get more fruit that way. It's also possible that it's kind of getting old. They're not going to live as old, like they can live for hundreds of years in the proper climate, but in this climate, you know, it is possible for them to kind of run their course. But that would be my recommendation, is cut it back, cover it with the mulch, and see what happens. If it was ripening, you know, figs in the past, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to get it to start happening again. And maybe even composting around it, making sure that it's getting enough nutrients. That could be another reason. It's usually not the case, but if it's been there for so long, maybe it has utilized a lot of the nutrients there. And if there's no input coming back in, you know, a lot of people rake up their leaves. They keep a nice tidy yard. Believe it or not, that's not great for plants. They like to have that organic matter decaying into the ground to feed the plants. So maybe compost around it, make sure that there's adequate nutrients, cut it back, mulch over it, and see what happens.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
So we just unfortunately planted a Celeste fig last year. It's just like a twig, you know? And so we have a southern facing wall that we've been moving to. Can we still move it? And if we do, will we more reliably get fruit every year?
Yes. Really one of the only ways that you're going to get good tasting Celeste that are, you know, ripe is to have them on that southern exposure and get that little bit of length to your season. Outside of that, it's never too late to put it in a container should you guys decide to do that. But if you have the southern exposure for it, definitely give it a try. If it doesn't work out, you can put it in a pot and get something else for that spot. Definitely not the end of the world on that one. It is a great fig, so if you can get it to ripen, that's good. Yes, ma'am.
I have a fig that was given to me. I think they said it was a brown turkey, and at the time that they gave it to me, it was a small plant. And that first season, it had a couple ripen, you know, within length of it. I put it in the ground. It's on the southern exposure. We have a brick wall. Last year, I only got like 3 before it got cold. I wasn't sure. I have tried to overwinter it by putting like leaves around it and wrapping it outside. I wasn't sure if there was a way I could prune it where I could put more energy into the fruit and not the new growth, because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of growth. It gets like 8 feet tall, but I'm only getting just a couple figs.
How many branches are on this fig at this point?
I haven't unwrapped it yet. I was gonna wait until after, because like I said, I'd try to overwinter. It's more of a bush. I didn't know if I should try to prune it more into a tree. I didn't know if that would maybe even protect it from dying back fully.
So I would definitely recommend I'm not necessarily against wrapping it, but if you're looking for the most fruit and you have a variety like brown turkey, in my personal opinion, it's like I would definitely cut it back and just try to get as many branches on that bush as possible, because you're going to get more fruit that way. The more branches, the better. Especially with something like brown turkey. You know, wrapping it might be, if it's like you're growing a fig that's kind of on, like a Celeste even, you know, something that's right on the border, it might ripen, it might not, and maybe keeping that upper growth alive might help it ripen. I probably wouldn't try to do a tree form with brown turkey. Does that make sense, or am I confusing you?
Well, it's just we have a neighbor who seems to have run into the same predicament as us. Is like that they had a bunch of growth. I mean, it's a beautiful tree, and they're like, oh, we only got one fig this year, you know. And so, you know, I didn't know if maybe there was a certain point in the season where I could start trimming it. I'd certainly, I mean, it'd be easier for me to just cut it back. It's just that I have like another one that's a violet. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah, Violet de Bordeaux.
Yeah, that of course it's younger, but like it's basically back. You know, it just goes back to that. So I don't know. I just seem like it's just crazy. It's like to the eaves of my house, you know, and then I'm seeing all these little babies. And like I said, the first year, you know, I had a few, and this time I only get like a couple. It just makes me feel good.
If you got it from a reputable location, you know it's definitely a brown turkey, then I would kind of give the same recommendation of cut it back to about 1 to 2 nodes before the ground, mulch it over the winter, add compost around it, just make sure that it's, you know, getting the nutrients that it needs, and there's really no reason why you shouldn't get fruit in that respect. It's very simple. Once, you know, you do it for a couple of years, it just becomes kind of nothing. You just do it year after year and you get tons of fruit. Yes, ma'am.
So do you have a fig tree guild or other plants that you plant with your figs?
So some of the figs we grow in a food forest style setting. At our farm, it's more about, we want to bring as many varieties to people as possible, and so we plant them in rows. But at our house, we do plant them in a food forest style. We just treat them as, you know, any other fruiting bush that you would put. But definitely try to give it, you know, full sun no matter what. 6 to 8 hours is perfect. Yes, sir.
In that situation, are there particular plants that fig intercrop or companion plant well?
I would go with the same lines as like, you know, the veggies and stuff. If you plant the very strong smelling herbs, things like that, it might help keep pests at bay, but there's not really a lot of pests, and so I don't think it's very necessary to do that. If you want to do it, you know, of course, that extra little step, it could help.
There are plants that just in and of themselves either encourage or discourage. See, around my figs, I planted garlic. The garlic's coming back.
Yeah.
I just wonder.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think it's completely necessary. But planting anything that's very strong smelling like that just helps deter pests from the plant no matter what.
Well, the deer eat my garlic too.
They take it all, huh? Oh man.
I can't see if anybody's raising hands, so I keep doing this. But
Oh, you're fine.
you ready? I can ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. I have a brick house that has a corner, and it faces south. And I'm wondering if that would be a good place to plant it, but I want to know how much of that horrible fill and junk that's down there next to the foundation that the builders put in there, how much of that needs to be dug out, and how far from that brick do I need to place the plant?
So typically they're gonna get about 6 to 8 feet wide, somewhere right in that range. So, which means kind of like 3 feet on either side.
Okay.
At our farm, we have them planted very close together. If you need to do any, you know, you plant it a little closer and you see that growth kind of just rubbing on the brick, there's nothing wrong with going out there and just cutting it to the shape you need.
Yeah.
But I would say roughly 3 to 4 feet from whatever structure. And what was the other
And
part?
okay, all that junk that builders put in next to the foundation, do I need to try to dig that out? And
I would, you don't necessarily have to get rid of it. I would just add organic matter to it, some compost,
yeah,
topsoil. The builders, you know, they don't care about the plants, and they'll throw the trees
No,
right
and
into
they
that,
just
and then
get
the
rid of
tree
their
dies, and
junk
everyone
in there,
wonders.
yeah.
But yeah, just add organic matter into it, and you'll be fine. Like I
Okay.
said, they do well in a lot of different soils.
Well,
As
when
long
you
as that nutrients is there, it'll be okay.
Do the roots get into your plumbing ever?
I wouldn't necessarily plant it next to plumbing because, you know, PVC is not all that strong. Concrete's not going to be an issue, but yeah, maybe not on top of like a main plumbing line or something.
Okay.
I plead the fifth on that one. Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying 4 feet away from the southern wall of my house is fine?
Yes.
It just seems awfully close, but
Yeah, they're not going to get
hey,
big at all.
I'm gonna trust you.
Yeah,
I'll
and-
call you if I have a problem.
So the same process can take place for in-ground plants as well as the container plants. When we talk about root pruning, that can easily be done even with an in-ground plant. If it starts spreading its wings a little too much, because it is going to be a bush and it has a tendency to get a little bigger and bigger, it's pretty easy to go out there with a shovel and root prune it and just keep it away. And if you do it semi-regularly, you're never gonna, I mean, it would be like maybe a 2 to 3 minute process of doing that. You know, just going out there with a shovel, cutting it off from the plant, and you'll be good. But yeah, I know it sounds nerve-wracking, but we've been doing it for many, many years now, and it's not an issue.
Okay, well, my main question, a friend had she said brown turkey, and I would trust her. So she dug it up. She said it's just everything's changed, and so it's too shady now where it is, and she decided to get rid of it. So I guess she pruned it back every year because she brought me this big hunk, this big rectangular hunk of not a lot of roots or anything on it, but it had a natural spot in the middle. I sawed that puppy in two, and I put half of it in each in these big barrels. I don't know that they're 10 gallon or what,
But they're pretty good size.
I thought, well, I'll throw it in there with some dirt and water it and see if anything does grow.
Yeah,
If
just
the
don't
chances-
overwater it.
Okay.
Especially if there's not a lot of root mass to it.
Okay.
They'll develop roots in that situation. Just make sure not to overwater it. Let it dry out between waterings.
Okay.
If people are gonna kill, because I would almost kind of consider that cuttings in a way. It's just like a large, massive
Large
cuttings. Overwatering is gonna be the killer on that. So let it lean towards the drier side.
Okay. And they could live in that pot, or they could live in that pot until I figure out where in the yard I want to go.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, cool. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Could you say something about watering in terms of in-ground plants?
Yeah,
You
sure.
You said overwatering, is that a danger with those or not?
With in-ground figs, it would be very difficult to overwater them. The water has a place to go.
Okay.
And I don't think, in my experience, people tend to underwater more than they overwater when it comes to in-ground plants, especially with new plantings. When you first plant a fig tree, I would treat it almost like you would any other fruit tree. Just make sure it gets a regular watering. If we're in a drought, maybe give it an inch of water a week, and that would be pretty good. And then by the time that second and third year roll around, you can just kind of forget about it. It'll take off from there. Yes.
In a permaculture trio setting, where would this lie? Would it be middle or would it be the tree? If we're pruning it back to the ground.
It would still be considered a large bush, and you want to make sure that the space is still there for it because, like I said, very vigorous grower. So it's deceiving almost in kind of a permaculture setting because you're going to cut it back and then you're like, wow, look at all this room, and then you're just surprised year after year at how big it gets. So just make sure that the space is there. And it is kind of hard to plant around it, to be honest with you, because it's so dense that it doesn't really leave room for other things around it, if that makes sense.
So maybe put it on the south side of the tree.
Yeah, that would be good. Yes, sir.
So, quick question. The two figs that are on the end of the table on the left, one obviously looks like a bush, the other one looks like a tree.
Yeah.
Are they different forms, or will the one on the right be turning into the one on the left when it's...
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. This one and this one have been pruned to be more like that. These others came from us, and we kind of like to leave the options open for people. So if it comes like this, it's like, okay, well, it's going to be a bush. it is what it is. When you have something like this, you have that leader, and you have the option to really turn it into a tree, or you have the option to turn it into a bush, and that would be pretty simple by just cutting it back, and it would take this form very easily. Yes, ma'am.
I have, like, it's a wind advisory around here, 30 miles an hour. Where I'm at, it's bad. I mean, we had to replace our lights because they crashed to the ground. So, is there any protection needed for big trees? And can you give me one? Because we are so rural, we've had trouble with ants, especially with like hummingbird feeders and stuff. So I prefer to get one that has that closed something.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So as far as the wind is concerned, figs are also extremely flexible. I could go over to one of the larger limbs and take it and then step on it, bring it all the way to the ground and have it bowed like that, and it will just bounce right back up. So it's a great option for the wind. As far as the closed eye is concerned, unknown ashbury black is a very good option. And you know, sometimes with wind, I'll just be honest with you, if you have those fruit on there and it kind of scratches the fruit, and then that it might be a calling to the ants. Which, like I said, to have some sacrificial fruit for the ants to have, and then you go work around them, that wouldn't be a bad deal. But it might be good for your location, actually. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a brown turkey. We've had it for 5 years. It always puts on fruit, but it also goes really late in the season for me to actually get it. So like the fruit starts coming off in September, October, usually when I start to get mine. So the last couple of years we have gone in, and ones that don't have any fruit on them, we've gone in and cut back those branches to try to push into that.
Right, to get that extra energy into there.
I was gonna say, is that right?
Yeah, sure. Tipping your plants is a common practice. If you're starting to come to the close of the season, go out there, cut off that where where that apical dominance is, where all the energy is flowing to build new branches, and just cut it off, and it will ripen those fruit up a little bit faster.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. Of the varieties that you have, what is your earliest to ripen? And then, have you noticed the difference in the stature of the different varieties? Are some more from dwarf form and some more vigorous?
That's a really good question. There are different structures to the plants for sure, but not enough because of how we're growing them in that bush form. As far as the dwarfing and all of that, that's just not a thing for us. Little Miss Figgy is a dwarf, so if you're growing it in a container, you know, it is a good option. But in my experience, it will grow to the same size bush as any other. So the dwarf factor, not really a thing if you're doing in-ground growing. And as far as the structure of the plant, if we were growing them into trees, I would be mindful of it, but because they're growing like bushes, they're all kind of the same. You might see a little bit different slight structure to them, like maybe wider gaps in between branches. So some of them will be very dense, and then some of them will be a little more leggy almost. But not anything that I would pay any sort of special consideration to.
In general, they're all pretty much.
Yes.
And then your earliest ripening fig or figs?
Violet de Bordeaux is actually a really good one because it starts pushing those ripe figs probably earlier than most of the other ones. For me, the berry figs the cold hardy berry figs seem to start ripening a little bit sooner, but still not a significant enough difference to where I would kind of recommend one over the other. They'll all really start coming into full ripening around the same time.
Okay. You mentioned composting. So what do you suggest for compost or fertilizing?
I would just get a high quality compost. Usually the stuff that you would get like at Lowe's has been sitting in bags for a long time, and it's probably not very living at that point. There's no telling how long it's been there. So a nice fresh compost that is being made in-house is good. And I don't know do you guys have any compost that you?
We don't have any locally made, but we do have the bags of the 3 different kinds.
Okay. Yeah, and brands is going to be a big deal there. I always go onto the big box stores, and it's not trying to totally knock them, because they do offer things to maybe places where people couldn't get anything else. But if you do have the option of going with a more high quality, whatever, and that might take a little bit of research even just to see what the company is about, and what their processes look like. And I know that that's kind of somewhat of a roundabout answer, but sometimes it just takes a little digging into those things.
And
But
then the fertilizer.
fertilizer, an all-purpose fertilizer is good. I prefer organic, but slow release can work as well.
So do any of those help the fruit come up?
If you don't have a very fertile soil, then yes. But if you're constantly doing the mulch, like what I'm talking about here, I'm a big proponent of mulch because it just breaks down over time, and people don't really even think about it. But if you leave that mulch there and you're putting it on every year, microbial life is breaking it down and feeding your tree, so it's not really necessary. But if you have bad soil, I would definitely work some organic matter in there, then maybe consider doing some soil testing and just see where you're at.
Containers? Sorry.
Yes.
Do you have a suggestion as far as what kind of containers are good? Because there's the grow bags, there's those self-watering, and then there's ceramic, there's plastic. So if you're just starting your figs in a container.
So one thing to think about is that you are going to be up potting these plants, especially if you get a smaller plant. You're going to be up potting them for a little while. You don't necessarily want to take a plant that's in a small container and then just throw it into a large container, because water is kind of going to take the path of least resistance, so you're not actually getting a lot of water to that root ball. And because of that, I would say go cheap on the container until you get to that final container for them. And the material doesn't necessarily matter if you go with like a clay pot. Maybe if you have it in an area that you have sprinklers or something and it's going to get water no matter what, I would get something like a clay pot that's going to dry out faster. But outside of that, any pot will work. Just make sure that you allow it to come to dryness between waterings.
Thank you.
Yes.
That tree has a little fig on it. Is it going to eventually ripen, or is that just one of those early ones that's going to fall off?
No, so the only reason those will survive, the only reason that they would fall off otherwise, well, you wouldn't actually even see them because the branches would probably be dead before the breadfruit crop started forming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's actually going to be a breadfruit crop that you see there. That's last year's wood.
Was that kept inside, or is that?
Yes.
It was kept in a
Yes,
garage
we
or
grow
a
those.
shed?
We grow those in a greenhouse.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's a greenhouse thing
Yeah.
right now.
Yes. So once they go into the ground, you would start treating them the way that you want to grow them, essentially. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me, where did the unknown Ashbury black originate?
Now it's hard to say origination because when you start going into the history of figs in this country, they're coming from Europe, the Middle East. So when families immigrated here, they're taking cuttings, growing them. So as far as where it came from before it was here and we came across it, there's really no telling. It's very difficult to know. But I want to say that unknown Ashbury black came out of New York from the backyard of an immigrant's house. So, yeah. And a lot of them have really fascinating stories, and people are like, we've been growing this for generations and generations, and this came from Europe, or so they have a really cool history, and I'm very much a history buff, so I do try to look into that. And some of them you can't know unless you really get into a conversation with the person it came from, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes we're able to get our hands on a new variety and we're just happy we got it, and you don't really push it too much. But then some people just love to talk about the history, so unknown Ashbury black is kind of up in the air as far as where it came from originally. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to go back to the watering. Like last summer was really dry down here. So what would you say would be too much water?
I wouldn't go more than an inch like any other plant that you have. Watering is one of those things we want to watch the signs. The plant's going to tell us, if you start having yellowing, dropping leaves, it's a good. If you haven't been watering it, it's probably saying, okay, I'm too dry. And if you have been watering it, it's probably saying, okay, it's too much. If if you're walking around the plant, plants can take quite a bit of water in ground, more than what you might even think.
Right.
But if you're walking around your soil and you're kind of sinking in and it's muddy, you're like, let's lay back on that.
So it'd be like if we're to have a dry spell, like every third day or something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. And they'll thrive in that, and even the mature plants, should you decide to water, can benefit from that. If it's an irrigated bed, or you don't have to worry about it too much.
So, he's had this fig tree for years, and we've gotten hundreds of figs off of it. Last year we got one.
Oh, bummer. I would give the same advice. I don't know what the growing location looks like. Obviously, if I saw it, I could probably give a good diagnosis, but.
What point is it that they're too big to maybe move it to a sunnier location? I mean, is that?
So if you want to move it to another location, or you would just like to preserve the plant maybe and move it to another location, I would just take a cutting and propagate it. I would recommend, our social media is called Plant Fanatics, and I blast people with propagating figs. I mean, maybe over the top, I don't know, but I would definitely check that out, and I would just propagate a branch rather than trying to dig up the whole thing, because you're going to get the exact same plant, but it's just going to be a lot easier on you than trying to dig that up or take a portion of it.
So where do y'all sell your fruit that you grow?
So we actually have a website, and we're direct to consumer. Locally, if you want to pick things up, White River, they're the only nursery that we work with. So as far as locally is concerned, you want to be here.
I mean, like the fruit.
Oh, I don't share my fruit.
How many hundreds of trees did you say you have?
We have 165 different varieties, and let me just put this in perspective with our peach trees. My wife will say things like, oh, we haven't gotten peaches in the last couple of years. I'm like, yeah, we did. I literally stood outside eating. I saw that you had a.
I did, thank you. Will a bush form tree get more fruit than a tree form?
Oh yeah. Only because in a container, we're going to dial back that growth. Now, if this was like a tropical zone or subtropical zone where that top growth would live, I would say no way, because they just get huge. I mean, be more fruit than you could ever use.
So you can only grow a tree form in a container here?
Correct.
Okay, that's good.
Yes. Yeah. Unless you want to wrap it, which we had talked about earlier. But it is work. It's definitely work. And there's no guarantees. Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can do that at any time with fig trees. It's in a container, because you said it's in your house, right? Yeah, you can do that at any point.
I'm thinking put them outside, but people say they quickly die in the winter, so I'm so concerned about it.
Well, do move it outside if you can, as soon as the weather allows it, because that spindly growth you're talking about is probably from a lack of sunlight, or it's just a very new plant. But yeah, if it's outside in a container, it's going to grow a lot better and really take in the sun. So, yes, ma'am.
These that have been grown in the greenhouse, these two that have leaves, is it okay right now to plant them in the ground now?
I would not plant it until after last frost.
Oh, April 18th or whatever.
Yeah, so
May.
it's kind of a double-edged sword, because they'll probably sell out of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like, well, if I don't have a place to put it, it's kind of rough. But if you do have, they can take it pretty well. And there's what's called the fig shuffle. Like, you start meeting some, okay, I guess I'm kind of a crazy person, but the people that have lots of varieties of fig, there's a thing called the fig shuffle. If you don't have a greenhouse, that time of year comes where the weather's warm in the daytime but cold at night. People are bringing their figs. I know people that have like 500 different fig trees, and they have them shoved in their garage, and they're
Back and
shuffled.
forth, back and forth.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, now, with a night like 30 degrees, I moved mine out. It's been out about 2 weeks in the container outside. And what is the 30 degree? Does that do anything to it?
No, it's not.
It's greening out. I mean,
If it's greening out, then that's naturally occurring. Like our figs in the ground right now, because of these warm spells we've been having, are starting to grow. Now, if we have a hard freeze below 28 degrees, then I would slide it in the house maybe for a night. But outside of that, 30 degrees is going to be okay. All right. Yes.
So I'm fig shuffling right now.
Oh yeah.
Last night I almost forgot to bring it back in. I was like, oh shoot, maybe it's gonna get too cold. But what? I mean, can I be leaving it out now? Or?
Oh yeah. Well, if it's gonna get below 28 degrees, that's when I would worry. Or if it's in active growth, like if it looks like this and the leaves are all in there, I wouldn't leave.
The leaves are all like almost fully grown from.
Yeah, you can leave it out up until probably that 32.
Okay.
The freezing mark.
Okay.
And then I would shuffle it back in. Yep.
Which is Tuesday night, just so you know.
Yeah, Tuesday night. Not looking good.
Chad, will you let them know that we will post the video up to our YouTube channel?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this video is going to be posted up to their YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it at any point. If you're like, I can't remember what he said, you know, you can find it there forever. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys.